Welcome back, book lovers. We are here, Bill Svitek and myself, Marisa Serafini. We're talking about The Midnight Library. I pulled an Audible and I was like, let's not read the book that I originally had us read. Let's read this one instead because, this was more feel good. And I saw a bunch of reviews on it. I heard people just talking about it positively. I was like, yeah, let's go with this one instead. Um, so yeah, is by Matt Haig. We're going to talk all about it. If you haven't read it, go pause us, go read the book, come back. Phil, what were your quick thoughts about this one?
The title seemed fun. The description seemed fun. And while it wasn't exactly what I envisioned, I think that was also good. It ended up being very philosophical, sometimes quite literally. And yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I thought it blended a lot of stuff together. It tackled very serious subjects, but also did it in a kind of fun, adventurous way. So there's a lot to dive in with it. In many ways, the ending ends kind of in a way like it was interesting. I was trying to guess of where is this going, and I had kind of a couple of theories that I'll share later. But ultimately, the ending is inevitable yet surprising, which is always fun.
Yeah, you know me, I love books, and it had library in the title. I was like, okay, great. We know it's about stories. So, and the minute I read it, I didn't realize, like, maybe for me, being a woman in my 30s, going through severe depression, I very much related to the protagonist, Nora Seed, and what she's going through. So, maybe this book stuck out for me, and it really hit close to home. And it really resonated a lot with me and what's going on in my personal life. Where, quite honestly, at the end of me reading this book, I was like, that's one of the best books I've read in my entire life, or one of the best books that I could have read at this point in my life. You know how we have those kind of books that are like, yeah, this was amazing. Um, and this book was one of that. Like, I didn't realize it was going to be as philosophical, but also it's like one of those stories that makes you kind of forces yourself to look at different perspectives of life, and like the good and bad, everything in between, and like what we tolerate and what we sacrifice for happiness, or what we give up, or for safety, and all these things, all these decisions that we make in our life to that leads us to the point where we are now. Are we happy? Are we not happy? Are we fulfilled? And that was, I felt what this character was, Nora was going through, that she didn't feel fulfilled in life. She wasn't happy. She was depressed. Everything she was doing, she felt like didn't have a purpose. She kind of lost herself. And like, what's the point of existing? What's the point of doing anything if she had a very defeatist mentality? And then I feel like that's something that happens with depression. And so, the main woman, Nora, she's at this point. Unfortunately, we start off that she's at a low point in her life. She's gone through depression. She tries to attempt suicide, and which kind of, launches her into the Midnight Library, which is basically this limbo-esque universe for her, where she can now um, be revealed all these different alternate lives that she could have lived had she chosen different things in her life. Um, what did you think of that concept? Like the different, we've seen a lot of things in the most recent media, I feel, in the last 10, 15 years about multi-universes, like different aspects of life. Did you like that concept?
Yeah, I did. I think it wasn't unlike some of the other stuff. It wasn't convoluted, and it really ultimately wasn't about a multiverse, right? I think a lot of times when you introduce, it's like we have to save the multiverse, and here it's
Right.
very much more grounded of like, no, she just wants to kind of live. So, and later on, it gets explained of how it works, but it's very simplistic, right? It's not convoluted. Hugo is the one that kind of brings in like quantum um, physics into it and stuff like that, but it's never like this diatribe of heady, nerdy stuff. It's just here's a simple explanation, and it works on an emotional level rather than facts and figures. And so I appreciate that because, especially, as we sort of learn, it's like the human mind trying to explain the incomprehensible, right? So for her, it's a library and a librarian who she knows and has a connection to. For Hugo, it's a video store with a salesperson who he has a connection to, and it changes depending on the person. And it's like,
Person.
that's cool, you know.
Right. And I loved how there, like, she had a grounding point with the character Mrs. Elms. That was always like your consistent variable for her. If all the lives failed for her and she didn't like, she'd always just go back to Mrs. Elms and be like, give me another one. Let's start over. Um, and I really liked that because it Mrs. Elms became a bigger character than I thought she was gonna be. And I loved how she was based off of character that had some important, significant emotional support for Nora that she had in her life that at a very um, prevalent time in her life when she first lost her dad, and Mrs. Elms was the one who was helping her through grief and stuff like that. And so like she played an important part in Nora's life. So it makes sense that she was like the most important person to be at the library to help her through life. And so let's delve into the different alternative lives that Nora could have had. Um, there were several. Like it gets to the point in this book where like there's a whole chapter where like she did this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Like literally at this point we don't know exactly how many books she read in the different lives she envisioned. But let's talk about the ones that they really did delve into. So the first one is her alternate life where she was married to Dan. Um, and that life, it turns out that yeah, they were, they had a normal, healthy-ish kind of relationship, but Dan turns out to be a very unsatisfactory husband, constantly drinking, demeaning Nora, and like hitting on other women in the pub. So maybe not as healthy, but it ended up, even that marriage to Dan ended up in a failure, emotional failure for Nora. So what did you think about this life?
Yeah, I mean, it starts off, the first task is for her to read her like book of regrets, right? And that's kind of a catalyst, okay, like how to decide which life you're going to try to live. And so not marrying Dan was apparently a regret. And then seeing this, eventually like kind of the idea is that there's less and less regrets in this book. And so not that you necessarily know it at the time, and certainly Nora doesn't, but it's like this is our first hint at, just because you might have picked a different choice doesn't mean they would have changed. So Dan,
Mhm.
I mean, the thing that she does realize in this is she starts to pick up on all the things that the Dan in her life did. We're going to call it the root life because that's what they call it. So in her root life,
Yeah.
there was a lot of red flags that she apparently just ignored, and here she's kind of reminded of those, and she sees the consequence of ignoring those red flags. And while it might not be the most heinous toxic relationship, I mean, there's infidelity, there's alcohol, so it's it's not really
Yeah.
going the way of happiness.
Right. So even in this alternate life where she thought she could have been happy with Dan, still ended up not being great for her. And then she chooses another life where her cat lives. Cat Voltaire lives. I say you have more experiences with pets than I do. I mean, I grew up with a few, but you more recently in adult life. But what was your thoughts about, what we could have done for our extended family when it comes to our fur babies?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, so part of her depression was in her root life that her cat passed away. So it's like she couldn't, and she felt that regret of, I couldn't even take care of this damn cat, um, and here she kind of learns it really wasn't her fault, and I like that's something that unfortunately pet owners do grapple with, and it's like you can't beat yourself up over it. You never like we are oftentimes their caretakers, and you try to just do the best decision and be an advocate for them. Um, but so that's a powerful lesson. Now, obviously, it doesn't necessarily ease the pain, but it eases the mental suffering of beating yourself up over it. So, and in an odd way, right? She learns that it's not that the cat died because of her, it died and left her because it didn't want to be seen and remembered in such a way.
Mhm.
So it's an active choice on the part of the cat, knowing that it was going to die as opposed to she killed the cat.
Right. And I feel like this is where we're learning in the book where just because she's making choices doesn't mean that the others are stuck to her choice. The others still have their free will in their own way and like their own kind of autonomous lives with their decisions and where it leads up to them within her new choice of life. And so she's like slowly learning there are different pros and cons to every life. Like if this happens, this could have happened better, but then this also happened instead. So we go to her next life where she could have chose a life where she was an Olympic swimmer, a very successful Olympic swimmer. She has regimen, routine. She's like in the best, healthiest, and financial state in her entire life. But she realizes that her motivation and need to succeed was mostly pushed because of her father, her parents. Um, wanted her that success. She felt more like she was doing it for her parents and not for herself. Um, she was fulfilling someone else's dream and not hers. Even though she's successful, it wasn't really for her. So what were your thoughts about this one?
Yeah. So obviously, it's the prime example of like outward success, right? And one of the things that as she travels through these various lives, kind of like almost like Inception style, she checks her totem, except her totem is, hey, in this life, am I taking medication? And did I cut myself? Do I have any scars and like, tattoos? And so, there are indicators of essentially how happy she may or may not be in certain lives, right? And so, as the Olympic
Right.
swimmer, there's that mention of an incident that happened and so forth. So she's gone through various breakdowns, and she seems oddly successful, except she's not. And in this one in particular, her dad lived, but her mom died, right? So it's like a flip version of
Right.
it. She's speaking with her like dead dad, and that has its own sort of implications for her mentally. So there's a lot there, and yeah, I really appreciate. I mean, it's a very like thought exercise for all of us, right? Like, if we could live any life, what would it be? And while we might not be fully grafted onto everything that Nora's going through, you can extract that and piece something for yourself, right? And so, being a successful Olympic swimmer is like, okay, that sounds nice.
Yeah. Like everyone knows her. She's famous and she's rich and she's healthy. But also this was one of the lives that like she did it for approval of others. She did it for the approval of her father. Again, she didn't do it for herself. So like therefore still has this unfulfillment on her because it wasn't for herself. And therein lies her unhappiness because even though outwardly she's successful, internally she's not. Um, so that was the life lesson that learned in that one. Um, she works in another one. She works in an animal shelter in Bedford. So this is where she has mixed feelings about her boyfriend if she went with this relationship with Dylan instead. And Dylan is actually like kind, caring, good for her, but not like the best person, like not very interesting for her in the marriage. Like, yeah, he was like okay, good enough for her, but not like the best person for her in this life. And I think it's very telling of like what we decide when we commit ourselves to people. Um, Not to say red flags, but just like, is it okay to, um, do we settle with people just because they're happy and safe rather than for love? So, it's that whole mentality of choosing who we want to be with in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dylan was very much described as like a dog in his own right, kind of a very lovable, very kind. Um, but, you know, like there's nothing outwardly like wrong with him. Like on paper, right? He's the exact opposite of what she experienced with Dan. It's just that there's something missing and you can't always quantify that. Um, but you get that sense, right? And so for her, she certainly did, and it wasn't unfortunately it wasn't the right choice. Um, but it's like kind of like all the right. I mean, it's very much like almost like a scientific exploration of like, all right, you might not know the answer, but now you know one thing that the answer isn't. So
Yeah. Like, okay, that could have happened, but then also, is that good enough for you? And then we move on to the next life where this is something that she would have been really interested, like a career that she personally wanted, a glaciologist in the Arctic. And in this adventure life, we also meet Hugo, who's another person who introduces us to sliders, people who go in between these different lives, exploring different alternate lives, and he's been doing this forever. He's seen so many different lives, and but he becomes apathetic to everything, that he still can't decide the perfect life for him. And he makes Nora realize like, oh, maybe I don't want to be a person who's just tries everything. Like she actually wants to settle into something. She's still looking for it. And Hugo's kind of like the opposite on that end.
yeah, I mean, he is, but he does kind of nudge her forward, right? And he tells her like dream bigger, like if you're gonna try out
Mhm.
lives, go for it. Which I thought was fun. For some reason, I thought like they would end up together. Like my prediction was that she would return to her life, but then seek out the Hugo of her world. you know,
Mm.
um, spoiler alert, not what happens.
I was like, did you think Hugo and her would end up together?
I mean, I don't know, like not that Hugo, but again, maybe the Hugo in her world.
Right.
Uh, Again, I mean, he introduces us to a lot. I mean, they do sleep together. So like there was some odd chemistry. I know like after it, she was like, I didn't feel anything.
Right.
But
I
I
think it
thought
was
that was
more
more of the
like
moment, but not, I don't know. That was just
right.
my
I think it was more out of convenience. They're both just exploring things right now. Like, hey, what's the harm? Like, why not? We're both in this together. I did like Hugo. He did, bring us to the fact that like, oh, you can actually get stuck in this life of just trying to find different lives. Someone who's not console like, and I felt bad for Hugo because he explored so many things and he still wasn't happy. Um, and I didn't want that um, for Nora. I wanted her to find a story for happiness, not become apathetic. And we move on to another life where she is in the successful band, the short-lived band, the Labyrinths, in her root life, original life, with her brother. Um, didn't She dropped out due to her depression and stuff, and that band didn't really go on becoming as successful as it could have been. So this life that she chose is if the Labyrinths became successful. What are your thoughts about this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, it's one of those like the Olympic swimmer. There's a lot to try to grasp onto. Um, like you have the success she had. She dated Ryan Bailey, the international amazing actor that everyone swoons over, except
Mhm.
it's kind of like a Dan situation, but seemingly worse. And the big thing was that her brother died in this version, right? So it's, you know, uh, it's not what she ultimately would have wanted, right? And so, and many of these, like, I think certainly one of the things that she starts to pick up on is there's a give and take to it all. You know, you can't, there is no such thing as perfection, you know, and if you make this choice, your cat's going to die, or your cat's never going to have lived, or, you know, her best friend Izzy could be dead, or this, or Joe, her mom. Like, it's just, you know, you're playing like whack-a-mole to try to figure out the right combination, and it just doesn't exist.
Right. It's like she wants one thing, but she can't have all the happy things because that'd be too perfect of a life. Um and that's what I say. It's like every story she's finding like a good positive thing, but also this also happened instead. So like the checks and balances of the good and bad and the ups and downs in life. So we move on to the next one with living with her best friend Izzy. So in her root life, she could have had the opportunity to move to Australia with her best friend. She didn't. Um, and so her best friend leaves, but they still like have this friendship connection where her friend sends her pictures of, humpback whales and just like living her best life in Australia. So like they still had that friendship there, but this is the particular life. Had she also moved to Australia with her, and I like this because this was a friendship type of choice that she made instead of like relationship, instead of career. This was actually like, oh, just to have someone in her life that's also healthy for her. But also doesn't end well. It like her best friend ends up dying. Like, and she moved there to be with her best friend. So your thoughts of this one?
Yeah, it's one of those, again, it just, you just grapple with, again, those seemingly butterfly effect moments, right? And so the choice to go and be with your best friend, the irony of which now she's dead and you live with a junkie and kind of have become a junkie yourself. So it's like in her root life, if she thought she was depressed, she's now even more
There's
depressed.
even more.
Um, so obviously a very tragic version of it. But yeah, it's just, again, another prime example of things don't go the way you hope. You can't really predict these things. Um, Seemingly someone has to die, and one of the,
Yes, like she can't have it all. She really can't. And that's also like just very frustrating because like I know people who've done that who have uprooted their lives or made a humongous life decision for someone and then they left them, whether it be a relationship, whether it be death. And I felt like, oh, do you still stay there for that person even though they're not there anymore? Or do you just change your life again? Um, and I think this was an interesting aspect for her. It's like, she could have done it for friendship, but ended up still being a mess, unfortunately. Um, and then ultimately we get to like the one best life that she found was really the perfect life, the happy, the closest to perfect that she wanted, that gave her that sense of happiness and fulfillment. Uh, a life where she was married to Ash. Ash originally in their root life was the guy who gave her the bad news that her cat Voltaire died. But he asked her out for a coffee date and they didn't. But in this life, she did go out on the date with him. They ended up getting married, living in Cambridge, also have a daughter. They have a happy, very successful life in Cambridge. Um, your thoughts about this one? This is the closest to happiness she found.
yeah, it certainly was a good life. What I think ultimately ended up being the issue was it's not one that she earned herself. So even if she could see herself there, and she, in this one, she spent so much time that like her mind started filling in the gaps, um, that she, had initially, right? When she comes into these lives, she's like, wait, where am
Mhm.
I? Who am I? What am I doing? And she always found clever ways to kind of get around that. And this one in particular, with the daughter playing a game of, asking her questions and the daughter responding, but the gaps itself just seemingly just dissipated, right? She could figure out the context, and so and almost like a slipper or like a foot into a slipper, she started to really fit in there. Except, you know, she stole the slippers instead of buying them. I don't know if that's the
Mhm.
best analogy, but that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, in this life, she realized how great it is. Like you said, she felt undeserving, right? And also she kind of had the conscious thought like, oh, this is a little too perfect. So that looming thought like, no, this is too good to be true kind of thing. So that's kind of like the bad end, the con for her, in that like even though everything's too is great, where's the dark spot? What's the thing that goes wrong in this one? Um, and I thought that was interesting. And I feel like people who go through depression, and not just depressing people, but like people who live in the more pessimistic side, are always like, well, what's gonna go wrong in this one? You know? And she did get to that point, but when and like sorry, we should have prefaced this like throughout when she's skipping around in the different books, like when she's deciding the next life. When she's really happy, the library itself becomes a little bit more unstable. And I mean, we can get into the parallelisms of that. But I feel like that was because she was getting more stable in the life that she was choosing to live. Therefore, she didn't need the library anymore, and the library was slowly breaking down and going away essentially, so she can live in the life that she finally did choose. Um, and then it after this one, like the library literally like starts to disintegrate, but it was really because she got to this point where she saw so many different lives. She realized the biggest thing that she was missing in all of her lives was just the potential and hope. She was missing in everything. It's like, oh, there's a reason to live, there's a reason to be happy, a reason to look forward to things. That's what I was missing in my root life. Something to just get me up, you know, every morning, something to like actually motivate me to do something, to actually enjoy life. And then that's what I think she finally realized and learned that lesson by this time in the book.
Yeah, and I think too a big part of that perfect life that she was living, it's not, I don't like look at it that she was looking for the imperfections. But with her neighbor being in the old folks home, and then her piano student now essentially being, a juvenile kid, um, I think it was a realization just how much of a positive impact she did have in her root life, that we sometimes overlook. And Mrs. Elm kind of exemplifies this for her too. Yes, I think in the moment, Mrs. Elm in her root life knew that when Nora found out about her dad's death, that, that meant something to Nora. But I mean, when you really consider it, the true impact of that, the fact that like Mrs. Elm is the representation within this library, like not her brother, not her mom, like, like people that she's in essence spent a lifetime with are not there. It's this, one person who did a very kind act, but it was also a very specific moment. And, you know, you could forget that, right? And yet we all have teachers and people that we've met along the way, that have impacted us. I mean, hell, like, we can even have our favorite celebrities or whatever, authors and so forth. And it's like, they don't know us, but
Right.
they have brought something positive to our life. And so I think she realized the reverse of that, that she has that on other people. And, she can lean towards that, and that's the potential that you mentioned.
Right. And that's what I loved about Mrs. Jones, because there's that whole saying that there are people who come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I felt like Mrs. Elm was that person who was reason for Nora. Like, yes, it was a very short temporary time in Nora's life, but it was such an important pivotal time that will last her for the rest of her life. So it's like talk about making an impression to the point where it's literally just the root. She was the grounding root character for her limbo. Um just the small act of caring. So that was like the first time someone actually cared about questions. You get into those intrusive thoughts like no one cares. No one cares about me. I don't care about anybody else. But someone does care about her. Someone did care about her at one point in her life. And Mrs. Ohms, like we all kind of need that person in our lives, you know. Um
There, I mean, she reconciles with her brother. She realizes the impact she has on her neighbor. You know,
mhm.
she returns to the piano lessons. Um, like it's not like this Hollywood style with a bow happy ending, but it's still a very upbeat yet realistic and grounded ending.
Yeah, and I think that's like also one of the lessons that Nora learned is like she might feel like she's not doing an impact, but the little things that she does every day impacts other people more than she realizes. And I love that because it's like it's little things that we do for, you know, our coworkers, our friends. Like you call me every once in a while randomly, but like I enjoy those calls because you know what? No one else calls me. You know, like everyone else sends emails or texts, but like you're literally one of the only people I can call in one hand and actually talk on the phone. It's like I enjoy those conversations. Like there are people in our lives that like something as little as that make a bigger lasting impression that makes us feel more fulfilled, you know, and she didn't see that. Um, you know, like that, like she's getting the clarity, like, oh, me bringing medicine to my neighbor is something that he looks forward to. Me teaching a student, a piano teacher, was like that shapes his life and becoming a successful, you know, student, you know, and who could have gone down a darker path. You know, it's like the little actions she does every day have lasting impacts that because she doesn't see it now, she didn't feel like they were existing. And yes, like sometimes, you know, small progress along the way, she didn't see the bigger picture. And
Yeah.
she finally saw that, like understood that. Um, this book was very philosophical. I didn't expect it to be. And
It's a
not gonna
philosophy.
lie, I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh shoot, maybe I should read more Emerson. I was like, I read a few, but like, man, I really I don't know, something about the writing, seeing it more philosophical in that way made me like just look at life in a different perspective, and I enjoy that a way that I normally personally don't look at life. And being a woman going through depression, I was like, all right, there are other things that, you know, just seeing it from a different perspective makes you think of life all over again. And I
Yeah.
like that.
There's I think it's Epictetus. Well, the idea is that there's a piece of document. If I read it, it's about like people complaining about younger generations being stupid and not knowing anything. And the irony is that it's written by Epictetus during in the Greek ages, right? So it's like as much as like society quote unquote progresses, everything as far as human emotion we kind of deal with over and over, right? And so
Still the same.
that's why like philosophy does connect in that way. Whether it's like Thoreau was the main one for her with his book Walden and stuff like that. And that
Yeah.
was in her perfect life. She was writing a book on Thoreau. but yeah, I think she referenced Hume and a couple of others. But yeah, I mean, the point of philosophy is to kind of give you a blueprint on how to live, a more,
Mhm.
and some people will argue, right? Like philosophers will argue, well, do you need a prosperous life, a fulfilling life, a happy life? Like, what is the point of living? Philosophy 101.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the choices that we make and that shape and define our lives. Like, do we have careers for happiness? Do we choose love for happiness? All the things that makes us happy, or all the things that, a lot of people choose a job just for money and rent. Lord knows we both do. But it's like the other choices that we could have made in our lives too that helps overall makes like life more well-rounded in that way. I love the symbolism of chess in this. Chess, very cerebral game, but just the idea of there are a million different choices you could have made at chess, all results. There's so many computational results that you could have had, but that doesn't also mean like the game is rigged, or that is like it's just literally the choices you make in your life. And just because there's a lot of you might have lost a lot of things or made a lot of bad choices early on in the game, early on in life, doesn't mean you can't win at the end. Um, and that was like I didn't see chess in that way. I was like, oh yeah, that's a great way to look at chess too. You know.
Yes, I mean it's so simple, right? It's both a very rigid game, right? 64 pieces and meaning squares, and
Mhm.
but within that, yeah, you can do whatever, within the conflict.
Infinite variations and endless possibilities.
Yeah, and just the idea of like, the pawn was also a big symbol because a pawn can become a queen. So when we talk about the ending with the potential, that obviously speaks to that. Um, and just yeah, the connection of people, right? I mean, that's the lasting image that we get is the real Mrs. Elm in her root life, along with Nora playing chess, and it's not over until it's over.
Yeah. And so were you surprised by the ending that she chose her original life?
Um,
Um,
I wasn't surprised that she chose her original life again. I thought, it'd be a little bit more grand. She's like, okay, I choose my life, but I'm gonna find Hugo, and I'm gonna move to
right.
Australia with, or whatever it is, right? Like something grand and declarative. But the fact that she makes different choices, but they fit her. They don't have to be screaming for attention, essentially. You know, like she still works with the homeless. Um, does her piano. Like she's found her happiness, and she's extended that to her brother, who is no longer upset about the band, but now he can be a sound engineer, which he'll be happy about, and he will meet Evan. So,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah, and it's all these things like she can help other people make good choices in their life too.
yeah,
Um, because she saw the potential of other people having successful lives and those alternate lives. Like, hey, in the original life, you could be successful too. So, yeah, I really did enjoy this and just we get so caught up of like what's not working in our current lives, what we could be doing, what we haven't done yet. And social media doesn't help with that, with comparisons like, oh, if I did this or had I could have done that earlier, whatever. It's just like everyone's on their own timeline. We still have a lot of life to live and all the decisions, good and bad, that shapes us who we are. Even though things might look bleak now, doesn't mean they can't be great at the end because life is a chess game. We're still making choices.
indeed. And I think this is a quote from The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, but I think it applies. Um, Everyone wants to tell you what to do and what's good for you. They don't want you to find your own answers. They want you to believe theirs. And when you really consider that, right, like, everyone has their idea of success, and and then that was the big lesson for her was I've been living other people's dreams of myself. Um, and now she finally is living the life that she wants to live. And, the perfect life with Ash. Listen, she's not married to him yet, but as she says, I might just go down to that half marathon or whatever the hell it was and cheer him on and then be like, want to get some coffee? Hell, we'll make it tea. So,
Yeah,
it's the future's unwritten. Make it a good
which is
one.
unwritten. The rest is still unwritten. Thank you, Natasha Bedingfield. Yeah, and we still got it, and I think the best one moment for me is like when she finally decided to live again. It's like I feel like when you have those stories where someone's going through life changes, depression, try to kill themselves, and they're like, there's that turning point, like, oh no, there's a reason to live. And then she finally had that moment where she's actually writing down, I am alive. Um, I love that for her. Like she chose to finally live.
No.
So that was great. I have never read anything from the author Matt Haig. I immediately already put in a request to the library to read his other books. I was like, this was fantastic. I loved this book. Um, a little bit about the author because I haven't read anything. He was born in Sheffield, Newark, Nottinghamshire. He currently lives in New York. He used to run an internet marketing company and worked for a nightclub in Spain. That's cool. But he became a full-time writer, and he used to write for newspapers, The Guardian and Independent. And yeah, and he has a lot of philosophical studies and stuff like that. And so like he infuses a lot of philosophy into most of his stories, which I enjoyed. Um, I think there is or they're planning on an adaptation for this one. Their upcoming Studio Canal literary adaptations include a film version of Matt Haig, The Midnight Library. Do you think it'd be good in film? Um,
I think
do you
so. I
think it would translate well?
Um, you'd have to change certain things, right? There are parts where it gets a little interior to Nora, but for the most part, it is um, it is very visual, right? Like, I mean, she's visiting these different lives, and I do appreciate um, the reoccurring bits, right? It's almost got not quite literally like a Groundhog Day. To me, it's a mix of like the Time Traveler's
Yeah.
Wife and Page Master.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think this would be a really great adaptation. I think there's so much in this book you can't fit in one film. I think it'd be better served off as a series, a television, like an episodic, where like each episode you can actually have the times and like screen time and duration to actually like flush out these into alternate lives that she could have used. Because I feel like it'd be really rushed if you fit all these lives into a 2.5 movie compared to have like a full hour per life that she could have had. I think that would have been fun. And we've seen like you said, Page Master. Like I grew up with Blues Clues and and like just the whole idea of diving into books. Like we love that. We know that's possible. Getting it involved into other worlds, like that'd be very cool visually to see. I think it'd be done in the right way, it'd be a great miniseries. Which I would totally, totally, totally watch. Anything else about this book that we may have missed? Um,
No,
favorite parts, favorite moments?
it's pretty thorough. I mean, yeah, um, I think she's just a great character overall. And yeah, I enjoyed. I mean, to weave a book like this, right? It's like I appreciate the artistry. Like it seems very natural and free flowing, but I can't imagine
Hmm.
the orchestration, behind the pages that it took to weave it all so masterfully. Because you get all the reason why it works is in every life, we're reminded of, well, where's Izzy? Where's Joe the brother? Where's her dad? Like all these things we're having to constantly recheck in and do so in a way that's not repetitive or forced, and stuff like that. And I mean, it's a very quick book too, so it manages to jam pack quite a bit. So kudos. That is true artistry.
Yeah. I read this book so fast, but there is so I felt like I lived so many different of her lives, And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it made me just reflect like, oh, what are the things I could be doing in my current root life that can make me more happy, more fulfilled. So as a woman also of the same age and range and depression, I was like, oh, all right, thank you, universe. I hear you. This is a book that's making me reflect everything that's currently going on in my life. So like it really, really resonated. Speaking about other books, what has there been anything you've been reading on the side for fun?
Well, I did finish The Burning God, which is the book number 3, the last book in the Poppy Ward trilogy by R.F. Kwan. So we will talk about that. That was the big one. Yeah. Um, so I'm
Yeah.
happy to have gone through it. It was good.
Yeah, I mean, those are great books. I as of the last month, I read It Ends With Us because the movie came out. I've actually had the first and second book on my shelf for a long time, but as a reader, I have more books on my TBR than I do in my current life. Um, so I finally got around to reading that book. Then I watched the movie adaptation, enjoyed both. I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, great. And I'm currently reading the second one in the series, Tales from the Cafe, because I really enjoy that one, talking about lives and making different choices. That's yet another book that's like that. And I'm currently in another book that I plan on reading, The Land of Milk and Honey, um, about a person changing their lives and moving to a place that's more flourishing and more successful for a current life that provides more than what they're currently in. Um, so that's next on my docket. So for what's next for us, Phil?
Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. So this is a South American book. It's written in, I believe, the 20s. If you like Jane Eyre and those type of you know books, then this is going to be, I'm told, within that realm. So
Nice.
we'll see.
Um, I admit I still don't have choices for November or January. That's still so far in the head of the future for me. But kudos to you. You have our next choices, so just list them off.
Sure. So we got Hollow Kingdom. Should be a fun book. Um, it's about this bird who lives in Seattle, and it's like a zombie apocalypse. And the bird's best friend is a dog, and they survive the zombie apocalypse in Seattle. So it's called Hollow Kingdom. Uh,
Nice.
so we'll see. I'm told good things. So so
All right.
that's December, and then we'll see if Howl's Moving Castle. People may know the movie
The
by Hayao
movie.
Miyazaki. There was a book, so I'm kind of curious. So that may be for February, but we'll see ultimately.
Yeah, I have seen that movie recently too, so that's fresh in my adult mind. That was visually a great movie, so if you choose to read that, I'd be very interested in reading the story. Yeah, we'll have more decisions too. We might call audibles like I just did for this one. And in the meantime, you'll know what books we're reading down the future. And thank you everyone for tuning in and keep reading with us. We'll see you for our next book.